Bu sene Türkiye Rüzgar Enerjisi Kongresi'nin 8.'sini düzenliyoruz ve bu kongrede yerli ve yabancı paydaşlarımızla bir arada olmaktan dolayı son derece mutluyuz.
Yelkenlerimizi büyüyen Türkiye'nin rüzgarıyla şişirdik. Rotamız istikrar, pusulamız gelecek. Hep birlikte daha nice başarılara birlikte imza atmış olacağız.
Kıymetli
distinguished guests, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you on behalf of the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. Of course, there is a huge responsibility to be the moderator of a very important session. We have very distinguished panelists with us. Of course, it is not an easy task to moderate this session. Of course, we have very distinguished panelists, so it means that the rule number one is that the moderator should speak less than the panelists. And for the sake of time, I would like to immediately start with Ebru Çiçekliyurt, also by making positive discrimination. There is actually the reverse brain drain, what we always call, and hopefully we will have more reverse brain drain. In 2012, after a superb career abroad, in 2012 she moved to Turkey, and not only, of course, limited to Turkey, but at the same time she is the CEO. Covering the other regions as well for marketing and business development, and at the managerial position at Siemens Gamesa, the Turkish CEO. Now, if you allow me, there is something specific about Ms. Çiçekliyurt. YECA 1 is, as you know, the YECA 1 wind power plant consortium. As Siemens Gamesa, she's actually one of the members of the consortium, so she will be elaborating on the progress that they've made so far in the consortium. And I'm sure that she also will maximize our motivation, because I know there are several nice improvements in the process. Very briefly, please, tell us about the progress you have made so far. Thank you very much, Distinguished General Manager. I first of all would like to extend my gratitude to all the participants. I actually have very familiar faces among the audience. Last year, right on that date, I was actually at the YECA panel. At the YECA project, I discussed about what we will be doing as Siemens Gamesa. But today it's been 1 year, so now it is the time to discuss about what we did so far. And it was quite a busy year, 2019, and we made a lot of progress. Let me just start with that first. As you all know, in 2017, the YECA one auction has been awarded to Siemens Gamesa Türkerler Consortium, and with the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, we have concluded a contract. According to the Division of Labor, responsibility of Siemens Gamesa and the contractual liabilities fall under a couple of categories. Number one is actually to invest on a turbine manufacturing plant, and the second is actually to have an R&D facility, including the Turkish engineers. And the third thing is actually 65% of local rate, localization. Also, that was actually among the priorities. So, under these three areas, let me just tell you what we have done. Let me just start with the manufacturing plant first. As Siemens Gamesa, we are just more than honored and very proud to establish the very first turbine manufacturing plant. With the global manufacturing teams and the Turkish engineers, we really worked so hard in 2019. Everything was very well planned. Each and every week, we actually followed the progress in detail. And at this point in time, it's at İzmir Ali Ağa Organized Industrial Estate. Construction is over, and the local and international manufacturing equipment are still in the factory, and we are at the stage of certification now. So we are about to conclude. By the end of November, hopefully, this plant will be ready for operation. Of course, after this point, there also will be the commissioning process. Of course, it is not something that you can do in a fortnight, not possible to reach a capacity immediately. So there is also going to be the commissioning process. And after that, we'll be reaching the full capacity. By the way, I don't know if you have ever visited Ali Ağa, our guests in here. It's very impressive, really. Each time we actually step on the plant facilities, it is quite amazing for us. And especially Siemens Gamesa, and on behalf of our country, on behalf of our company, we are very proud, physically observing the plant facilities in front of you. 40,000 square meters of a land that we have. First, the capacity that we will have 500 megawatt, I can say, per turbine. And of course, our suppliers, of course, you also have to recruit the suppliers, which I will mention later, including them 500 job opportunities that will be creating for our industry. And there's a special meaning, of course, for the plant. It's actually very first in Turkey as a turbine manufacturer, but also I can say it is concretely contributing to the development of a specific industry in Turkey. Considering the beginning of 2000, when we were at baby steps, for example, even no one will ever think that it is just going to be possible to actually, I don't know if people remember, but it even was very difficult actually to manufacture any of the components. But now all components can possibly be again produced in here. So with the start of this, I can say the entire turbine will be able to be manufactured in Turkey. And while we were designing the YECA project, There's the vertical integration of the plant facilities. We also considered that. It's actually a truth now, especially distinguished general manager and his team. I would like to thank to all who contributed to this process. Thank you very much on my behalf and on behalf of the country. For the R&D Center, at the first quarter of 2019, we started the recruitment process. First, we set up our, management team, and a temporary authority started to run the R&D Center, and we continue with the recruitment process. In August, they moved to their permanent office at İzmir Bayraklı. And at very specific areas, I can say we have R&D engineers, specifically educated and experienced, 30 employees full-time, and this number at the same time will go up. We have some targets. 1/3 PhD, and all the others, almost all I can say, with the postgraduate master's degree, and some of those that have its reverse brain drain from Europe, from the United States. Turkish engineers are joining us. All employees are Turkish, by the way, and especially our company completely relies on the infrastructure of the Turkish engineers in Turkey. Our vision is actually to raise the bar in terms of the numbers that will recruit the engineers and the technical infrastructure. Siemens Gamesa's R&D Center. It is just going to be one of the 7 R&D and technology centers of Siemens Gamesa. In Spain and in Denmark, there is a knowledge center. That's what we call. It's going to be one of them. What do I mean by this? State-of-the-art technology will be developed. It actually has such capabilities. Literally, actually, it is R&D, not it is actually production and development. It is research and development fully. And at the same time, technological know-how will be developed in Turkey. And therefore, as Siemens Gamesa will be significantly contributing to this process. So we are also very proud to be the one and first. And the other point is the, again, supply chain and localization. The 65 point of the localization rate that we have under the specification. We have a very dedicated team, and they are working very successfully. And there are several actual success stories, a couple of those that I would like to mention, and there is minimum 51% of localization, like the tower, the anchorage, the generator, the blade. The localization rate there under YECA, thanks to the activities of Siemens Gamesa, it's already been increased significantly. And so far, in all wind power plant projects, 14 product groups imported for the first time at the YECA project. We are actually localizing them. And these activities are still ongoing. And lastly, at Siemens Gamesa and YECA, the global companies, one of the global companies, 6 of them, decided to invest in Turkey, and they selected Turkey as the manufacturing localization and location in Turkey. So the global suppliers will also be brought. And therefore, it's actually quite a concrete step forward. And we also have partnership with 2 companies. And also on behalf of our suppliers, we also will be including them. As I told you, Siemens Gamesa in 2019 had a great year. And especially in terms of using the local resources, the current deficit, employment, these are the macroeconomic targets of the country. We are also significantly contributing to these targets. Thank you very much. Of course, we wish you speak for another hour because it's something extremely important. Why I'm telling you that, so as to raise the awareness in particular. Maybe some of the people here already know this, but of course with YECA, the level of the localization that we have, for example, I attend to meetings at different ministries and they're always asking me, I mean, what is the progress that we have made so far? The incentives that we apply, whether they work or not. People are asking that. For example, which equipment are we using and what is the level of local rate? I mean, the stakeholders, the relevant ministries are mostly asking these questions. The bureaucrats are asking me about this. So it is actually very useful. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Let's move to Hakan Yıldırım. Thank you very much, Hakan Yıldırım, on behalf of myself and the industry. It's actually a great organization. I did not want to mention that, but you're a visionary, and together with your executive committee, actually. So thank you very much for all who contributed to the organization of the event, and we also have the chance to work with them. And so Hakan, as I told you, is a real visionary. So thank you very much for this event. So let's start. You are actually the partner of Ebru at YECA 1 WPP again auction. You are one of the members of the consortium, and you also have very valuable actually investments in the overall energy industry. You are the CEO of the Kalyon Energy. So what I'm telling you is, so what are the developments? What is your progress from your perspective? Thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor for us to organize these events. I mean, it is actually the stakeholders, not us. We're just a coordinator, and it is great because everyone owns the process. Hope it will continue. Of course, I'm talking on behalf of Kalyon Türkerler. From the perspective of the consortium, there were three things you should do to win, to be awarded. First of all, find the correct partner. So one of the leading turbine suppliers in the world. The plan initially was to finish the construction by November, and it is over by November. So that is one of the major partners in the world. The second thing you have to do is just sit around the table and give 1 cent under. And if there is actually a Chinese around the table, just go away. But we couldn't do that. Jihan is actually here, and they are actually at the same time a stakeholder, but of course I'm joking. Of course, once you write YECA, Siemens, Kalyon on the Google, there'll be two photos on the screen. One, I think 419, the opening price, and there was actually 3 companies left, and 412 the other actually left, and the Kazım, myself, all we have photographs, and it's just the price that we've given. And then there is with 348, and there is 200 million US dollars, by the way. I'm saying 349. Actually, I wish you have seen the photo. You would see the mood that we all have. What I'm telling you is that the experience that it is easy to award a contract. I mean, you just, give a price, whatever. But what starts is after that. I mean, once you've been awarded the contract, that's okay, 1,000 megawatts. Of course, you just become serious. I remember the meeting on that day. After we were awarded the contract, we had a press meeting, and Kazım 5 times told us that our partner will help us from the financing perspective. Of course, I mean, technology side is okay. We already knew it because we have Siemens Gamesa, no doubt about this. But the financing issue. After being awarded the contract and signing the contract, what we focused on the most was have to do the financing. The team, establishment of the team, JP Morgan, for example, one of the leading banks in the world, was our arranger. But in the last 2 years, 1,000 megawatt find the project financing, the problems that we have. Even in 100 megawatt projects, so many problems that we had. So it was a great challenge. We tried different things. Let's include a Yekden project. It was 314.8 with a capacity factor, another one with increased capacity for 1,300 megawatts, or maybe 1,400 megawatts. Trying to actually have a leverage for 348, but there is no liquidity in the market. Put aside 1,000 megawatts, even for 1,300 megawatts. So, at the side of Siemens Gamesa, everything was so good, and that is really motivating us a lot. 2 days ago at the senior level, we have actually a verbal agreement as well. By the end of the construction of the plant facilities, of course, we will place the orders for the turbines, and in 8 to 10 months, I guess the first turbines will leave the factory. The financing issue is much better when compared to the previous years. For example, about the 1,000 megawatts, maybe a non-cost project finance. Let's do it just once, and let's handle the project finance. And we thought we can do it at once, but now we'll just place 300 megawatts, 400 megawatts, gradually, step by step. Therefore, it is just going to be turned into a standard wind power project. Of course, we have ongoing challenges, as you all know. In Turkey, in particular, maybe there are a couple, I don't know, maybe very small, minor, small-scale projects, especially financed locally. But there's always the EXIM coverage. There's no doubt about this. But Siemens Gamesa, considering the countries that they manufacture and export, Denmark and Spain. Denmark Exim Bank, they provide insurance for very large-scale projects. Especially, it contributed significantly in the last decade, but the country risk, concentrated country risk, they don't want to increase it more. 15 million euros is the limit that they have, 15 million euros. I don't know, maybe we can cover 3 or 4 turbines. Back to Spain, 250 million euros. That's the country limit. I'm not speaking about our credit line. That's all that you have. Once there's no insurance, you're all aware of the fact that what is happening. Even with insurance coverage, it's not an easy task. And we cannot ignore this fact. Together with our partner, this is what we're discussing all the time with Siemens Gamesa. With regards the project financing at the political level, it is something important for Turkey, for our country, for the manufacturing company, and also for the countries that they do export and they cooperate. So we're just trying to build a structure that will facilitate this. Once we have the R&D at this level, of course, we'll assume our responsibility. That is, of course, placing the orders of the turbines immediately, and in 12 months, of course, we will discuss it mutually, especially after the commissioning of the factory. The turbines will be manufactured. YECA one must be a success story. It is not an easy project. There is also the localization commitment as well, and therefore local products will also be used. A manufacturer and an investor is just meeting under the roof, and therefore they are mutually responsible for each other. And financing such a thing is not an easy task, because at the end of the day you go to the bank, and the bank is giving credit to the financier, to the investor, and then you just go to the manufacturer, and it is not an easy task. I don't know, maybe in the second round we can focus more on financing issue, but we are very proud that we have these plant facilities, we have all the equipment, we have the R&D. With ISCA, a protocol was signed. Next year, TWEC will be held in Izmir because Izmir is actually on the way to become the capital of wind. Siemens Gamesa also selected Izmir, and this is also another reason why we decided to have the next meeting in Izmir. I have no doubt that the ecosystem will be set up around this. As I told you, the moderator should speak less, but I actually have to say a couple of words. Hakan mentioned that we've gone through some challenges in terms of financing. You're all aware of this, and very distinguished panelists from abroad also mentioned the same thing. And the CEOs mentioned that during the panel and in our talks. 450 megawatts especially is not a nice level, and our average is around 800 megawatts so far. I mean, considering those that have been commissioned so far. And of course, during some years it was 1500 megawatts, but I think the reason why we fall down the level is the status quo. Because of the foreign exchange attacks. We've gone through an economic war, and I think it is pretty normal to have these consequences. I mean, hopefully, we all together will overcome these problems, and once again, we will reach to the desired investment levels soon. I also discussed the same with the CEOs of the global suppliers. I believe that in a very short while, Turkey should reach to the former potential. As you have mentioned, 1,000 megawatt, for example, as you mentioned with your motto. So I guess we'll be doing our best. Of course, at the second round we'll elaborate more on this, but let's go to Arif Günyar. With YEKA 2 auction, you are one of the members of the group, and you just jumped on the train at YEKA 2. So maybe you can briefly summarize what you have done at YEKA 2. Of course, in asking you that question, of course, you will be talking as an economist, because he's an economist at the same time, but of course from the perspective of the renewables. You also know this field, you also have an education, so you're a very experienced general manager from Enercon Turkey. So what attracted you in YEKA 2? What are the regions you've been awarded, the total megawatt? Would you please inform us? Distinguished General Manager, thank you very much for your nice introduction. I also would like to express my gratitude to all the participants. Now, YEKA 2. Now, what motivated us to get into YEKA 2? As my colleagues already mentioned, we have done great things. It's of course great to see that they made a lot of progress. This is inspiring us because we're on the same boat. And if they are successful, if they expand the supply chain, we also will be able to find more suppliers in Turkey, which is an important thing. But I think I also will criticize them, maybe from a perspective. I know that we've been the first of everything in the past. In 1998, we actually realized the first wind power, again, for the service and maintenance company that we established in Izmir in 1999. In 2000, the first steel tower manufactured and supplied. In 2001 and 2, again, the rotor blade factory, again, we established the first. In 2009, the very first, again, concrete tower manufacturing facility that we established. Of course, it is not only limited to the past. We thought that we should go further. So in 2019, a second blade factory uh, again constructed in 2019 for the first time in Turkey. I mean, a direct drive generator other than Germany, manufactured for the first time in Turkey, and we started the delivery. And we also have our local product made in Turkey certificates. I'm not advertising the company. What I'm saying is that there was no obstacle for not being a part of YECA. We've been in this sector for more than 2 decades. We already have our supply chain, over 500 suppliers and the subcontractors that we have. And we have over 800 direct employees. We always rely on Turkey. Yes, we also joined the first YECA 1. Why in YECA 1 we were not that much aggressive? At YECA 1, there were some problematic requirements. I mean, not directly as Enercon, as Polat Limak Group, as a consortium we joined. And it took 1 minute for us to go away. I mean, we did not actually join the open auction. Now, we had a lot of negotiation with the ministry, and why we were reluctant or why we were not actually aggressive. And we discussed it also with the ministry at that time. And things were corrected at YECA 2. I'm not saying that the ministry was wrong in YECA 1 and we showed them that that was wrong. I'm not saying that. Please don't take it personally. YECA 1 actually was a great scenario. It was perfect, but not only the manufacturer and the investor, but there's also the financing world. As you all know, it's been discussed a lot, finance issue. I mean, you actually need to have a project that the financiers will accept. At YECA 2, this time, some of the problems were corrected. So, we were aggressive. For Balıkesir Muğla, 250 megawatts each, and we've been awarded that contract. I think we'll discuss it at the second round. I'm not saying everything is perfect in YECA 2, of course that's not what I'm saying. There are also several things that we need to improve, but eventually, for YECA 2, it is, I can say, more positive and feasible for financing, thanks to the improvements that hopefully will be made soon. I think in the second round I will raise my suggestions for YECA 2, so thank you very much. So, 2 things I would like to mention. Yes, you're totally right. Of course, YECA 1 and YECA 2, they are 2 different things. In the first one, the point was about a manufacturing plant to have an R&D center, and there has been some improvements, right? I'm not speaking about the model. What I'm speaking is what we desire for and what we ask for, I can say. And it was actually about price formation, but at YECA 2, when compared to YECA 1, we actually should make some modifications and some addendum, like the change of the legislation, especially so as to facilitate financing. We did it right. At YECA 2, some of the things have changed. I totally agree with what you mentioned. It is actually not something like correcting a mistake. It is a process. And that specification evolved consider this like a learning curve, because you design a model and you have to make fine tuning and make it much more favorable for private sector financing. Of course, at the second round, we'll be discussing it more, no doubt about this. Now, with İsmail Bilgin, we'll be completing the first round. İsmail Bilgin is actually the Deputy General Manager of a major group, Enerjisa. Before he joined Enerjisa, he also had an impressive career. And of course, especially at the point of financing, so it will be important to get his suggestions because he was in the sector of banking and corporate finance. So I guess you are just going to be the one with a holistic approach. And at the same time, you're at the management level. You're heading a management group with the highest portfolio. Yes, for YECA 2, what do you think? What are your considerations? And the prices and the region, if you share it with us. Thank you. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the participants. Actually, you made a great introduction, and all the other panelists. What is different between YECA 2 and YECA 1? Why some of the groups were much more competitive? And they actually had a nice photo at the end of the awarding of the contract. Maybe I can share some feedback from the auction. Once we have been awarded the contract as Enerjisa, several of my colleagues from the industry were surprised. You know, Enerjisa is a very cautious company, and whatever, for example, they give us at a price, just go 1 unit under, you still will make profit. That's what people were saying. So we did not start with YECA 2. At the beginning of 2017, we made a strategic assessment. Our portfolio was already commissioned and operational. 1,600 megawatt renewable and also thermal power plant, they've been all in operation. 3,600 operational portfolio and paying for the debt. There will be a growth or not? Yes, after a certain point there will be a growth, and we thought solar and wind will be a way to grow. And therefore, YECA was an opportunity to us, starting with YECA 1. But we checked the technical specification of YECA 1 even before the auction itself. With the banks, with the suppliers, we discussed. And it was quite surprising. I mean, I remember very well. It was either April or May. We asked Garanti Bank to join us at the meeting. That's the specification. Do you think there's any possibility to finance it? I'm sure you're also talking to the other groups as Garanti Bank. No, you're the first to call us. No one else called a bank. I mean, probably you're not going to be competitive. But we ask Garanti Bank, I mean, we just want to understand the entire structure, what could go wrong and so on. And then, initially, 1,000 megawatt, I mean, the volume. Considering the number of investors, it is limiting the investors. I mean, 1,000 megawatt means also you need to have a manufacturing facility and so on. 1.2, 1.3 billion. And it is $800, $700 million worth of a financing minimum initially. You're on the international market. Of course, after the major banks, you also have to go to the small banks, you know. There's a saying, that's the book building in the finance world. In other words, you need the money that you need you're just checking from how many different banks you can check it. And it's always a high cost one.
Bankacı bir pakette bir kredi paketi
It is not actually possible. Think about a credit package. I mean, it's not possible that a big bank will give a price lower than a small bank. It's the common denominator. So, therefore, the larger portfolio that you have, your financing costs will differ. It's a huge topic, actually. Why? Because so as to increase competitiveness in an auction, how many participants, it's a problem from this perspective. And the second thing is that there's an expensive financing and independent from the country risk. You're doing it expensive. It means that it, of course, will be reflected onto the proposal, the price that you offer. So for the second YECA, it is 250 megawatt for 4 each, which is a good thing. Why? Because you give the investors the opportunity to select the regions that they would like to be competitive. And the second thing is that smaller investments means you can find smaller financing. It means that the financing cost at least will relatively go down. Of course, there is the status quo in the country. I'm just putting them aside, the country risk, as I told you. And as we discussed yesterday about YECA as well, it's the scale economy. If you would like to make use of the scale economy, of course you should not reduce the volume down so much. 100 to 250 megawatts of an interval of a range, if you're asking me, is good for a YECA project. It's competitive, and it also helps you to make use of the scale economy. It is such a size, in my opinion. Therefore, this 250 megawatt times 4 auction, it was a good opportunity to us. And the second topic is that, as Hakan Arif already stated, the equipment manufacturer and the energy generator. To convince them for co-investment is a difficult task. Why? Because we're just used to be on the other side of the table. Because at one point in time, your interests will conflict with the interests of the equipment manufacturer. And on the top of this, your expertise, their expertise, totally different. As a group, for example, we have a certain level of expertise and a mandate. We actually have a mandate that is what, in the cheapest and the cleanest manner, we will invest on the technology that will generate such an energy. It could be equipment, R&D. It's not something that we experience or not something that we desire to invest or have any experience in. So during the YECA process, from supply moving to local manufacturing was a great thing to us. Why? We said there's something else. It's local suppliers we're talking about. We checked the Turkish market, plans of Siemens, GE, Enercom's plan, and we were sitting next to each other with Arif, and we've been awarded the same region. It was a nice thing. Why? Because I know that from now on in Turkey, at least 2 equipment manufacturers will be providing for localization. What does that mean? In a competitive manner, I will use them during the auction. So when we put them all on the top of each other, I can say from my perspective, it was a very well calculated process. So we have completed the entire process. Now we are really very hard working on the development process. Unfortunately, no one from my team came here because they were either in Çanakkale or Aydın. They are on the site all the time, and they couldn't make it here because considering what could be the best project location, the permits, the environmental issues, and about the best place to erect the turbines and so on. So they're working on the site. So for YECA 2, I can say with with those awarded to YECA 1, so I think we're just competing who will be erecting the first turbine. And so that's the competition that we have. One other topic I would like to mention, all these projects that we have in hand, I mean, looking at the technical specifications plus the contract about the actual development, of course, we have room for improvement. And we knew it beforehand, initially, before we get into the auction. But I mean, you don't have the chance to write everything in detail in a contract. As you mentioned, that's the learning process. And during that learning process, as you mentioned, the investors, the authority, the equipment manufacturer, we all will be learning together. And as long as everyone is ready for doing that, I don't know, maybe next year with the decision for an investment, either one of us among the three will decide for an investment. And I don't know, maybe we'll say something different at TWEC.
Diyoruz. Tabii siz anlatırken bizim işte elektrik piyasası.
Thank you very much. As you talked, of course, there is a thing that came to my mind is this also happens as in banks, marginal pricing, quoting principle, as we say. And actually, this is the latest accepted bid is applicable. In this respect, these are really important. And in terms of the economy of scale, when we're just speaking, as I said, it is important what you're willing to achieve and what you want to do in a model. Of course, you're in the obligation of defining a size, and if you really want big investments to take place, you need to define a given scale, because otherwise, when you make it as very small scaled investments, you'll have the risk of losing the economy of scale. And as you say, quite correctly, it's a learning process. This time I'd like to start with Mr. Hakan for the second round. Capacity allocation models, what can these be for the future? Would you like to share your opinion with us, sir? Thank you, but I also would like to continue from where Mr. Ismail stopped. Actually, these kind of partnering structures, I mean, technology provider and investor being a partner, he said, is not easy. Now, you have not yet experienced this with a turbine supplier, but I have already experienced this in 2 YECA projects. Actually, we've been involved in this partnership. One is Güneş YECA, and there is just one renewable plant in Güneşli, and that's a good example. In Güneş, in actually solars, there was a joint venture, I mean 50% of partnering, and we partnered with one of the biggest PV producers and suppliers with Siemens Gamesa. Actually, in that partnership, the balances are quite relevant because your partner is quite competent in technology, but they don't have the spirit of entrepreneurship. You don't know about the technology, but you know about the local conditions, and you have that spirit of entrepreneurship. And there is a power plant to be built, and there is a facility, a factory to be built. Of course, quite diverse opinions come up. I mean, it's not necessarily conflict of interest, but it's sometimes lack of understanding each other. And especially, I mean, maybe I'm supplying technology and I'm putting on the table this value. This, you know, is what your partner says. And you say, I have local experience and I'm going to provide finances, but you're just 50% partner. Managing this balance, even if you're into a joint venture, I think is not very easy. And it didn't work out in the solar. Actually, the global companies may have a different perspective. Siemens has been there for 160 years, and that's not maybe applicable to them. But as a Korean company, I mean, when it's just a few years that they're present here, when the company has American partners, and all of a sudden they get into the discussion whether they want to go out of the market, when you're getting prepared to a $3 billion investment. And last year for solar, the only point of concession was just to separate our waste. So we separated our waste. And then we've seen that this time the owner of the factory is just the same, and it's the owner of the power plant is the same. And when it turns into a structure as if it's the only, owner, the risks that will come out of the two projects will be borne only by one side. And by the way, I mean, it's just really very recent update. 10 days ago, after really spending huge efforts, one of the largest PV manufacturers of the world, this is almost a 200,000 employee company. We've concluded an agreement with them for EPC and turnkey commissioning of the factory. And by the way, it's just been on the way for a while, and the equipment, the manufacturing of which has already been completed. And we're speaking about 4 facilities. I mean, speaking about the solar side, we're speaking about 4 facilities. 4 under the same roof will be completed, turnkey, and we as Kalyon will be paying only the money, and the performance criteria will be met for the company, for our partner. For 2 years they will be operating, and it will be only for the factory 200 or 300 experts coming from China. Now, when you have this kind of a structure, it becomes somehow, us Kalyon turning into an industrialist, but at the same time as a business model is making an investment. This is what First Solar is doing. I mean, they're manufacturing thin films, and they're just making it, and it's a business model. So this business model works, but when you bring in an industrialist, an investor, together, one has the task of building a factory, as in wind, and our job is to make power plants. If the R&D cannot be accomplished, license will be terminated. These are the conditions on the table, and knowing the conditions, we've taken the auction. Therefore, transition from YEKA 1 to 2, I think this most important turning point is where this exclusive liability was broken. In other words, a project that was taken with local commitment, I think, has been one of the biggest changes, because this is really critical in financing aspect, because it's not easy to find the answer to the question if the partner cannot do the R&D. Like for instance, we went to a bank and asked for $1 billion. The bank said, you're asking the money, I'm giving you the money. So you have a control over the power plant, but out of my control, there are some issues. If my license is abolished, what happens? And this is really a very critical question to answer. So if you ask me, and this, we need to resolve in a way. Otherwise, we cannot finance YEKA 1. But this, regulation in YEKA 1, the industrialist will need to do both the industrialist approach, and the funder, the financer, will provide the money. This really is critical. The two groups brought together with different fields of interest is really very critical, and whatever would happen on the way, I think it will be the risk that will be perceived in the finance world. Therefore, in transition from YEKA 1 to 2, I think your DG is quite successful in arranging the transition. So, Mr. President, I think that the ideal way of doing it is, we've been working with you for many years, And as an agency, the agency is really eager to learn. Therefore, you may invite international financial institutions, and the very moment that the auction is granted, I think we should make sure that that auction is in a way fundable. But of course, that takes bilateral agreements and talks. I think maybe we should be discussing whether really we've given too much of what needs to be given. It's negotiable, I think. And at the point of entering the auction, now the banker will need to be there saying that if you're going out with these conditions, it's fundable. Because when you put on the table a specification, somebody will buy it. I mean, they will buy the future. This happens, that happens. U.S. currency will be this, that. I will find it in a way. Then comes the problems. My personal humble opinion is inviting the companies with a renewable experience. Everybody should be invited, and we should be discussing how the relevance of the ECA projects will be in that respect. What kind of a mechanism should be there? I think we should sit around the table and discuss, if you ask me. And I think we can also put our contribution there. I think it's not quite right to lower the ECA down to 50 megawatts, because ordinarily there are 30, 50 megawatt licenses granted. And of course, what is about the renewable is that the renewable plant should be as big, and this way that will be the condition, of course, for a larger local content condition. This is the spirit behind it, and the spirit is not just about providing licenses. Yes, 1,000 megawatts is really big. I mean, in a normal project, 200 megawatts each is okay, because this is ECA, because the motivation there is to ensure local content. About the ECA projects, of course, we've been keeping the pulses of the sector as TWEC. But how should the mechanism be there? When you put in a room the investors with the spirit of entrepreneurship, when you give them an opportunity, if the profitability varies according to many parameters, of course, positive aspects will be considered, and then you get lower and lower with the enthusiasm of the auction. But we, as TWEC, just suggest that a ceiling price would just be announced, like $6, and the lowest price, the floor, maybe the baseline, the lowest would be also announced. If this is 250 megawatts, or if it's 50 megawatts, we can make calculations accordingly. For a 50 megawatt project, if you move on in Turkey, capacity factors will be the lowering, 32% of capacity factor taken, and in the conditions of the day, let's take finances. It's maths at the end of the day, and this is something that the investors and bankers would do it quite right. I mean, which level would make the project feasible? And when you go to a banker, the profit should be bankable in a way, and the price that you reach there, I think, should be the minimum price, $5.22 according to the calculations we make, is leveraged cost of electricity. If it's $5, now the investors will start getting down, and when you get to $5, if there is still more than one investor, let's not accept under $5, because it's the bankable level, and the rest will be the risk taken. And after that point onwards, it's not about lowering 5, but of course tendering out with a price per cost increase. I mean, maybe the investor is keeping in the pocket something. I mean, maybe he's just keeping it for the dowry of his daughter. And maybe if later on he will just make a equity investment, that's okay. But other than that, what is it? I mean, 100, 250, whatever it is, $5.22, the bank will find it feasible, bankable. And other than that, they will be losing some money. I mean, some someone else. Maybe we'll just cover it with another price. But whoever buys it, the project should be feasible. I think this is basically our suggestion. We have two suggestions. Number one is about the mechanism. This, I mean, if you allow for this lowering prices, I mean, maybe someday it will be the minus prices that they will come down to. Yes, of course, the project is doable with the minus prices. It totally depends on the conditions and parameters. But particularly once we get to a bankable level, of course, it will be make sure that the project will proceed faster and sounder. The second suggestion is when there is a YEKA project, or the conditions, the specifications and everything, if it's really bankable, and if I mean it is really something that needs to be doable. There is actually the experiences out there. We have a big experience together with Siemens and TWEC, and on the solar side as well. And actually, the companies having been awarded YEKA 2 will have that experience. Of course, in the sector, there are groups having funded big projects. And yesterday, we sit with several bosses. I mean, these are the companies who funded 5,000-6,000 megawatts. And by developing a common mind, we can invite international banks to negotiate. I mean, when you say it's bankable, the next day you will not bring new conditions on the table. So these are the suggestions that I can raise here. About 522, let me give you my idea. I mean, there are those who won YEKA. I mean, it's ended with 3.5. I think 522. You say it's the bankable level, but if I may, I'd like to also take the word and would like to say something. I mean, there are three things that need to be done. Find the right partner, get down. I mean, if there is a Chinese, run. Yes, when you put in a room of investors together, they will get down to it. I mean, condition number one. I mean, it's just in the specifics of the company that there can be a big cash flow. I mean, probably they will be reflecting upon it. Yes, I get it, but at the end of the day, when you put in a room the company, even if you get back to per megawatt, it's 522. And you may sometimes not be able to keep it per megawatt according to the conditions. Of course, we are speaking about two reputable global companies, Enercon and Enerjisa. Probably they've made their calculations well. Briefly, I'd like to add on to that. Generally speaking, the price coming out of YEKA and YEKTEM should not be confused, because we most of the time tend to do so. Like, for instance, Çanakkale, we were awarded with 367. Could we go down to 367 for Aydın? No. Çanakkale is a specific project. Balıkesir, Aydın, they're all specific projects. But when it is YEKTEM, the mechanism that we need to build upon is doable. I mean, considering the doable wind potential, if it's 25,000 megawatts, I mean, it may go down to 28-30% capacity factor. And when you go to 28 or 30% capacity factor, I mean, capacity allocation model, when you get into a tender or an auction, actually, I mean, in Çanakkale, İzmir, Balıkesir projects are granted for per megawatt or per unit prices. So the investor is just leaving that to the state. But the level there should be correctly set. Like, for instance, in YEKA 1, the opening price was 70, came down to 35. And YEKA 2, I mean, it was 70, 72, 73. I mean, now that it's just come down to $35 in YEKA 2, if we open up many sites for $35, unfortunately, auctions cannot take place. I mean, because of lack of interest of investors. In offshore, there was this projects that happened in offshore. We sat and studied with 3 groups, 110. We couldn't get down to 110, and it was not possible. So when this is the case, the logic of YEKTEM actually, I mean, if the long-term target is 25,000 megawatts, the price will be there just to meet the worst conditions. So the rest will be left to the state. I think this, having worked on many sectors, I think this looks to me the most logical system to me. Mr. Ismail just emphasizes, and I agree totally with this opinion of yours. I mean, we can make a decision on specifics of each project. We should be discussing about the different aspects, specifications of different projects, because this will lead to different pricings. Now, if I may, Mrs. Ebru, I will ask you the same question, passing on to you. Siemens Gamesa and Mr. Hakan made a broad assessment. There is a comment that I think is related to you. Hakan said quite correctly, and he's just given us quite nice data about solar. I think the input was quite valuable. In YEKA 1 wind, he emphasized that there is a problem that may emerge for funding. R&D activities maybe are not exactly performed, leading to a total abolishment of the contract. This may be the risk that will be there, but actually we can make this kind of an update rather than a risk if the risk that emerges there can be funded. I mean, not because of the cancellation of the contract. If the financer will see some risks, we may also switch towards a structure that you can also make the project bankable. At that point, the problems will be resolved. To be honest, there's some improvement going on there. Therefore, the activities are not interacted with each other, and this will be leading to the abolishment of the contract. But as you know, there is an amendment in the legislation, and we are running some negotiations for abolishing or for amending the contracts. If you can show what the risk is about and you can make it bankable, then you can easily negotiate these dimensions of the risk. Now, turning to you, my simple question to you is, on an international scale, you have a huge experience, and moving from that experience and looking into the fact that when you were in Turkey, you were covering not only Turkey, but also other countries. You were in some director positions, taking a look at other countries. How do you see the YEKA projects, and how would you expect the system to evolve in Turkey? Thank you very much, sir. Now, let me start with YEKA 1. When designing these kind of mechanisms here, first policymakers start with a target. In the specifics of renewables, of course, the target is to encourage localization. There are some sub-items. Number 1 is volume, number 2 is local content, number 3 is bankability, legal framework. These 3 aspects, I think, are quite critical in implementing projects. In YEKA 1, I think the main goal when designing it was to ensure local content. For any global company to come to Turkey and make a direct investment in Turkey, the number 1 required condition is always volume, and I'm not talking industry specific. Without volume, no global investor would come to Turkey to invest. Therefore, localization was the main purpose in YECA 1. That was essentially the reason why YECA 1 was designed with a big volume. If you designed it as 250 megawatts rather than 1,000, I wouldn't say that any global investor would come to Turkey to start an R&D center, because at the end of the day, the global companies always have some alternatives to Turkey. They have existing facilities, and the capacity usage ratios of the footprint of their facilities are considered in making a decision for investment. Therefore, they would make that investment only if it makes sense. And 1,000 megawatts was required in YECA 1, yes, because to achieve the main objective. And looking at the future YECA models, if still the main goal is to encourage local content, if there is a vision that only one factory would not suffice and we would need 2, 3, 4 factories, then the volume should be high. Otherwise, no one would come and make that investment, to be honest and to be realistic. Of course, we may also say, well, then what happens to the small and medium-scaled investors? For that, YECTEM and other auction models are formalized by the ministry. And here I think the main purpose when setting these mechanisms is to fulfill different needs. So different mechanisms should be out there to meet different expectations. This, I think, has been successfully accomplished in Turkey. In YECA model, like the investments in Siemens Gamesa investments in Turkey, YECA 1 model, I think, has been quite successful for localization. Looking at other countries, many other countries could not achieve that. Therefore, as I said, all the designers, the ministry teams should be congratulated about that. It's really nice because it's served its purpose. We've set off for localization in Turkey. So being able to do that in the best way, if we want to turn Turkey into a hub in the region and in the future, and to make Turkey as an exporting country as Spain, if the vision is such, sustainability and consistency are quite important in these policies. Rules shouldn't change as we play the game, so that we continue to attract investment as Turkey. I think it was Mr. Hakan who said that Turkey is not a market. That is right. Turkey not being a market, for the global companies to see Turkey as a strategic country rather than a short-term market, we should be predictable, sustainable, to be able to attract such investments. And this is our vision. Why not the wind power sector become like an automotive sector in Turkey? Why not Turkey becomes an exporter of these services? The technical engineering infrastructure exists in Turkey as a global company. We believe in that. It's up to us, up to our policies, up to our disciplined approach to make sure that that happens. So in summary, different targets are achievable with different mechanisms. For localization, without getting into details, I would like to say that we have reached a certain level in localization. Blades, tower, and these kind of components are locally manufactured. So these have become commodities now in Turkey. Therefore, if the real meaning of the local and the vertical sector, if it's our vision, the components which have not yet been localized should be encouraged to achieve full localization. Nasal components, nacelle, test or assembly processes may be highlighted here. The third aspect is clearly explained by Mr. Hakan. The designs, as the projects are developed, as the policy designs are just worked upon, project financiers, banks, lawyers, I think should be consulted upon. It's really critical because at the end of the day, this is business that aims to achieve profit. So the figures should be optimized correctly to attract the investors. Therefore, the floor pricing concept, I agree upon it because you may have megawatt targets on paper or projects written on paper, but they will not be implemented. So it is really important to design projects that can be easily and rapidly implemented. I would like to ask you the same question in terms of capacity allocation mechanisms. What would you expect for the future? How would you expect it to evolve? And with maybe some international examples, what can you say? Yes, sir. Of course, my colleagues from the investor side and the industrialist side, there are some problems, and at the stage of creating consortia, and I'm having those conflicts. I'm both an investor and an industrialist, whichever would be more dominant. Of course, investor ID. Probably will have some problems maybe in building turbines, but we are turbine manufacturers as an AKOM or system suppliers as defined in the regulation. Why are we in the renewables business? Because in Turkey, we've made significant investments to manufacture turbines, and we believed in the local policies, and we still do. And of course, there is a chronological timetable. In the last couple of years, we've made significant investments, and no supplier will allocate you a factory contract for nothing. You will have to make promises for 5 years minimum, but we cannot see beyond 2020. But hopefully in the coming weeks we will see what happens in Yekdem. This is what we need to know. And unfortunately, we're not, regretful to be a part of the renewables business. Of course, hopefully we will conclude this. But sitting around the table with my colleagues and discussing it, people complain that we cannot see the future. And YEKA 2 is just help yourself operation. And in a way, the manufacturing line, how that can be preserved for the years to come, and how we can provide a promise for the future for the investors of ours. This is how we set off. This is not a first-time operation for us. Enercon, as you are asking, is not our first time. Yes, maybe a first time in Turkey, but it's not the first time in the global scale. In 2006, in Portugal, there was a 1.5 gigawatt auction in Portugal, and that auction has paved the way for a 3 gigawatt installed capacity in Portugal. And similarly in Brazil, which is an older maybe process, but there was a 300 megawatt project in Turkey in early 2000s, and the blade factory was installed for that. But if that happened, maybe if more happened, just believe me that for the moment we would have more manufacturing dynamics in Turkey. But unfortunately, and I'm speaking about 300 megawatts, the auction was cancelled in Turkey, and that we decided to make an investment in Brazil, and now we're building turbines from A to Z in Brazil. Hopefully it will happen in Turkey. In Russia, currently there is almost a 1,000 megawatt in renewables like auction that we won, and we're building in Russia for the moment. And this is not a method that is stranger to us in the global scale. And I'm sure that when we believe that this is what we need to do in Turkey, only with a correct modeling, and the YECA 2 specifications has made it possible for us. Of course, all local, international investors, everyone that believes in Turkey, we are open to their suggestions. And about capacity issues, I agree with my colleagues, with the panelists before me. It is up to what we want to encourage, and it's really critical. And currently, we are still talking on YECA 2. There are some problems that we see, but rather than talking about the problems, it's not a booklet of recommendations. Let me tell you about the problems that we've come across with at the preparatory phase, and maybe we can also discuss on how we can make the administration more sensitive. And for YECA 2, where would be the site? This is the definitive point.
bile ki rüzgar verisi olma durumu da
And it's about the wind data, and of course we have limited knowledge, of course, about the wind data. And will it be us who will be allocated the site? Will there be any other permit problems?
yatırımcılarımız çok kıymetli.
Yesterday evening, really, the competence of Turkey attended a meeting, and even they were complaining about the forestry permits. And I just asked to myself, have we done something wrong? Maybe we have overlooked some lacking points. So we have to think about these problems, and yesterday's investors are the ones who are doing it as a core business. They are just doing it as an expertise. And I don't say we're afraid, but of course we have some drawbacks. And for renewables in particular, the Ministry of Energy and your DG in general should have a one-stop shop office, maybe working as a coordination spot, because we have to make a commitment about what we are going to do in a given period of time, because we have quite high collaterals, and we should be just moving on without being blocked by these problems. This is what the investor side says, but the industrialist side is more worried about the starting point of manufacturing, and I think this is what we need to coordinate. But to be honest, and I can say it quite frankly, your DG and the ministry have been quite helpful. And I'm not saying this is because you're here, but you're trying to help, but at the contractual level, in terms of making it bankable, I think some things, unfortunately, will have to be written down on paper. And on the financial side, of course, we're making a calculation because we are to enter an auction, and with the enthusiasm of the auction, you may sometimes get in the flow of the auction. But there is a good and a bad scenario. And if the good sites, class 1 sites, are just allocated, the price can be brought up to this, that. So there are some calculations that we are making. And after the YECA 2 calculations, you see we don't have a lot of alternatives, so we are not flexible. But this we don't know for the moment. And when doing the financial modeling of all of these, there is a big unknown ratio. The banks, we don't get any data from them. And on the other hand, the financial model is just built on an unknown basis. And of course, we are speaking about a project to start in 3-4 years, but you have to also predict what is to happen in a few years' time in the banking world. My suggestion there would be in renewables and 250, 500 megawatts, and I agree with the rest of the speakers, but in preparing for the YECAs, before getting out on the auction, the administration must identify the sites the previous, I mean, people previously assigned people, they have big data at hand, naming the sites, and within these sites, I think the wind measurements must be present, and together with the wind measurements, and looking at the permits, whether the site is clean. Clean meaning, will there be any mines or will there be any problems that the investor is to face? And after knowing this, the investors willing to attend the auction will be given these measures and these site info. Everybody will just align themselves according to this data given to them. I mean, making a calculation, making their planning for a given type of turbine. So it will become more concrete. Unknowns will not be there. And at least you can talk to the banks on concrete clues. I would like to ask you to consider this, because the biggest problem at the preparatory phase is this portion of unknowns. Thank you.
Yok, estağfurullah.
Thank you very much. It's been very valuable to get your considerations on the topic. Now, Ismail, you've already mentioned, but very fast, very quickly, I also would like to have a Q&A, to leave a Q&A session. And I also will steal 5 minutes from the coffee break. So let's make a wrap up and then the questions. I don't want to repeat what had already been said, but, considering YECA for capacity allocation schemes, what is critical is the uncertainty of YECDEM. We don't know what is going to happen after 2020, so it's very difficult to decide on an investment without making things more clear. Clarity is important, not possible for local investors, not possible to get any financing, and if, for example, one of your partner is foreign, I mean, even if, for example, you are a foreign company, predictability, without predictability, not possible to use the already existing methodology. The YECA models, looking at the international markets, the purchasing guarantee is around 15 years or so, but it starts with the signing of the contract, so it reduces down to 11.5 years, I can say. So the international investors are used to the long-term guarantee, so we are not at that level. So it is reduced. And once you don't have a predictable pipeline also for the auctions, and so the project developers or the energy generators cannot make the necessary planning for themselves. Or Siemens, for example, is coming in here and making a factory here, but what is going to be the megawatt for the next year, or what is going to be in the upcoming 2 years, so they cannot be predictable about it. So what I observed as the most critical is, after 2020, what is going to be about YECDEM? We need clarity in the market. And then the YECA models or the allocation, how it is going to be, it must be described in detail. And therefore, I think Hakan's suggestion is very good. I don't know, maybe at the wind side, as the association, the Turkish Wind Energy Association, I don't know, maybe you can have a couple of seminars you can organize with the ministry to discuss about the suggestions. And we as the investors, as the wind investors, we're ready. Thank you. Now, if you allow me, let's start Q&A because we'll be going beyond the time. Time is over, but very short questions, short answers only. And someone should help with the microphone. Cem Yalçın. My question's for Ebru. So you actually are playing a major role as Siemens Gamesa for bringing your know-how and everything, and using the Turkish engineers. So as an R&D, there will be a totally new design to be manufactured in Turkey, and what is going to be the certification? I mean, which certificates you'll be using? I think I have to ask my colleagues there about the certification. The first accredited local turbine was made by us in the 2016. Are you aware of this? And in the 10 years as the local technology, I mean, we are the only company as a unique company and a local. So you mentioned it's an actual success story. I mean, 7,000 components that actually we manufacture in Turkey. That's the actual success story, in my opinion, without having the support of Siemens Gamesa's technological infrastructure. I mentioned about Nortel, also Enercon mentioned. You mentioned about the local manufacturing, and he also included us. There were 19 companies within 20 years, and only Nortel left. What you're doing is extremely important, especially for the scale economy. But in Turkey, while being the first, or saying that we are the first, because you mentioned this a lot of times, I think you have to be careful, or at least Enercon and the other companies should not be left aside, in my opinion. So once again, the certification I'm asking, Funda maybe should take the floor. For Siemens Gamesa, and she's in charge of the localization. Maybe they can, maybe later. I mean, because maybe they should talk later. Maybe very briefly, but very briefly, because we don't have time. Of course, we receive from the accreditation bodies and TSE again locally, and in our portfolio we have so many suppliers, and we actually have a certification process. I think it's brief enough. The entire design is here. So with among all the alternative companies.
Evet, teşekkür ediyorum.
Yes, you maybe should talk later. Maybe you should discuss it later, personally. Maybe I can make a comment in here with wearing my hat as the association. For the last decade, the biggest complaint that I have is that there are just a couple of people who are manufacturing towers, blades, and so on. In the last years, we've been speaking about the generator. That's the tip of the iceberg. But the component manufacturers, the one under the sea, we miss that. Just 3 or 4 stakeholders that we've been talking about, and we thought we are representing the Turkish wind industry. But trust me, from now on, it is the time that we start the industrialization. When I go to Wind Europe in Brussels, they are an association just like us. What they are dealing with is just the industry side of it. Installed capacity, 1,000, 3,000, it's not. It is just the industry that they're talking about. So my request from Cem is that people like him and others, because you spend a lot of effort, I just want companies like you to be much more active at the association. Also, you should be cooperating more with the global companies, because once they build their supply chains, they're using you. I mean, they are designing also the assembly of 8,000 pieces or the components. So we need you. And I think you have to be more active, and you should be more visible. It is licensing, if a licensing issue or the erection of, for example, a model turbine, we can help you. If any question, yes, please.
Hemen sonra da size gelelim.
Merhabalar, Altuğ Bilgin.
Altuğ Bilgin from Bilgin Energy. Just as a contribution to what Hakan said, megawatt-based pricing. There was an implementing regulation, but it's not used. And we were supporting that. I mean, maybe it could be paid in cash, and there will be, for example, a default if there's any failure to develop the project. I don't know, maybe what Hakan said would be valid, hopefully. Or at least if capable companies would be more on the forefront. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution, Kürşat from Top University. My question is from the sustainability perspective for the technology companies. Once the ECA project is over and you place the orders, in the remaining factories without any need for any incentive, do you think you will be cost effective and do you think you will continue to be sustainable? Do you have a roadmap? An overall answer. I shortly mentioned during my talk, but in these types of investments, I mean for the Turkey specific, the first thing is actually to attract investment. So you attract investment. The second thing is of course sustainability of the investment. For the investment to be sustainable, there are certain parameters like the continuity of the volume, predictability of the market, visibility, macroeconomic dynamics, the overall atmosphere for investments in general, being investor friendly as a country, and the strategic production footprint, and of course competitiveness of Turkey in terms of the labor, human resources, in terms of the supply chain, and of course at the level of cost. Of course, if it is possible to bring all these parameters together, of course it will be possible to have sustainability. But of course, as the global companies, as you would appreciate, we analyze each and every parameter in detail. But of course, it is not a cause for actually not having sustainability, because as Siemens Gamesa, we believe in the potential of Turkey. I also totally agree with this. You know, it is the wind power national matter. It is 25,000 megawatts of target that we have. And considering that it is realized, yes, of course, all these manufacturing plants will be useful. Sustainable, the adaptive one will go down. Will go deeper down. I mean, because geopolitically, you know, we are at the junction of three continents, and especially we have emerging countries from the Arabic Peninsula to the CIS to the North Africa. Turkey can be a hub in the future, and therefore, as I mentioned in a couple of conferences, yes, localization is important, and especially to improve the local market we do this, but to increase the export share and to maintain sustainability, especially the Turkish-made turbines, how they will be marketed abroad. We should discuss about this. Ministry of Industry and Trade should be a part of this. We talk to them. For example, we have Hermes of Germans and Kart of Denmark. And Turkish Exim is not, Exim Bank is not active, the export credit institution. And especially, for example, an investor willing to buy a turbine in Japan, for example, why will come to Turkey but not Germany? I mean, which mechanisms we are offering them to get our turbine, what type of financial model that we offer them. That's all that we should think. It is something extremely important to us. Why? Because Turkey, in particular, looking at Far East, like China, like India, these are huge volume markets. We should be competitive with them. And the production cost is not at the level to compete with China or India. And now countries like China and India, they're also offering financial packages. That's an advantage for them. So they produce cheaper, and plus they offer a financial package. We're not at that level yet, unfortunately. So Ministry of Industry and Trade, I guess, should do something about this and should take action immediately. Maybe one last question. I work at the Norge Energy. Siemens Gamesa, Kalyon Türker, congratulations actually for being awarded the contract. Because during that auction, really we were competing a lot, and 200 million euros left on the table. You are right. It was actually, we did not want to do that. So we left the auction. So congratulations and wish for success during the course of the project. At the second YECA, congratulations for Enerjisa and Enercon, and especially at Nordex myself. I mean, I've been in the sector for quite a long time, and it's quite nice. What you did was correct. And I wish that you will successfully complete the project as Enercon. Zekeriya, you mentioned very briefly, but in your talk, maybe about changing the conditions of the contract could be the case you mentioned. And I mean, solar plus wind for the renewable for all YECAs. I mean, it would be a wrong signal to have a material modification in the conditions, especially for the senior executives of the global companies. Especially for foreign investors, it's not a nice thing. It would be a wrong message if you make some material changes. I totally agree with what Arif said. I mean, I think the ministry or the government can identify the site. Maybe very briefly, I can. Just one last thing to mention. We totally support that. Even our suggestion to the ministry is that before YECA auctions, we could have project development auctions. We have so many consultants in the audience. They know very well how to get the licenses, permits, and so on. Maybe they can develop the projects and you can put the projects on the auction. Because the biggest problem is that you have to identify the turbine costs of 4 years ahead. As Nordex, at YECA 2, for example, Enerjisa, we actually had to give them so vague prices. And then maybe the projects should be developed, prepared, and maybe they should be in the auction. And then the winners can come and get the turbines from us. If you allow me, I would like to answer both questions. Let's start with the last question. It is not something uncommon. You know, there is an additional article to the electricity market law, and we are just doing it for the national, local, other coal resources, especially expropriation and environmental impact assessment is performed by the public side, and the site is made ready. I mean, as a generation site, it is defined. I'm saying it for local coal, and then we start the auction there, and I think we did it again at the electricity market law. Possible. But of course, we need to consider the pros and cons. But I've taken down note of this. As an answer to your first question, I did not say changing the conditions of the contract. I did not say it. There is a change in the law, notwithstanding the rights already given to the investors. Some modifications may be made to the contract. That is the wording. Therefore, for the financier, it's not like canceling the license. I mean, for example, there is actually joint and several responsibility, because once they cancel the license, that is what you mentioned. So we're just trying to provide a protection on the contrary. That's what I said. I mean, I don't want to convey a wrong message, because what is mandated by the law is that it is just article that I mentioned the wording about. That is the modification that we are speaking about. And it is just limited to the rights of the financier. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you very much for the audience. And I've just taken 15 minutes from the coffee break. Sorry for that. And wish for the success of the project. Thank you.